My name is Molly Carr, and I'm the CEO of Jewish Family Services of Western New York. JFS is a multi-service agency, and we provide everything from behavioral health services and care coordination to refugee resettlement services. I'm here today with Ann Dobler, who will be presenting. We're talking about the Unite for Ukraine program and how and what the sponsorship process looks like. So if you're here tonight, I hope you're interested in learning about sponsorship, because that's what we're talking about. We have a presentation, and I'm going to get the slides started in a second. I feel like I need stage directions. Like, what can I do? All right. So just for tonight, we're going to be talking about an introduction to the Unite for Ukraine program. We call it U4U. Understanding humanitarian parole. How to formally sponsor a Ukrainian refugee, what the roles and responsibilities of sponsors are, and post-arrival support and program eligibility. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ann.
So I'm an immigration attorney in Buffalo, New York. I'm a private attorney. I do contract work for JFS, and I'm volunteering to help on this program. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what humanitarian parole is and the unique nature of this program. The U.S. government, with many of our immigration things, they're very long and complicated and form intensive. This truly is a humanitarian program. From the time that you start the online process until the beneficiaries, the Ukrainians, arrive, it can be as short as 6 to 8 weeks. So it really is fairly quick. It's not form or super time intensive for the immigration part, but the helping the family after they get here, which Molly will talk to you about, is a little bit more intensive. So humanitarian parole allows a Ukrainian refugee to come to the United States for a 2-year period of time. Currently, it's not true refugee status. They really are only admitted for 2 years. We aren't sure what will happen at the end of that 2-year period of time. They may be able to go home because Ukraine has won the war. They may apply for temporary protected status or asylum, or parole might be extended. So the other parts of the program, they're good for 2 years. They are able to get work authorization, although they have to apply for that once they're in the United States. And they could be without permission to work for 4 to 6 months. There's no independent immigration status. It's not a green card. It's not a permanent status. There's no right to renew it. It's basically a program of the executive part of the U.S. government. It's a presidential type program. So if there's a change in administration, it is a program that can change. Ukrainians, they must have a U.S.-based sponsor to participate in this program. They must present themselves at a U.S. port of entry once they're approved. And the airfare and none of the real costs are covered by the U.S. government. That's part of the agreement between the sponsor and the individual they want to sponsor. So the process of applying for this, it's all done online and by email. The initial application process is done on uscis.gov. And in the package that we provided you are a lot of additional information about that particular process. When you go online, you're filling out a form called an I-134 Affidavit of Support. It's your indication to the U.S. government that you're willing to be the individual or the family's financial sponsor. Along with that application, you're going to upload financial documents, usually a transcript from the IRS. Those are available at irs.gov, and that's also a free opportunity to get a copy of your tax transcript. The Affidavit of Support form itself, it asks you pretty much for financial information. It'll ask you to disclose a social security number. You have to complete that. And in that application, you're also going to give information about the Ukrainian individual or family that you're sponsoring. You have to have that full name and information about the individual. There is no filing fee. It's filed entirely online. The minimum financial requirements are 100% of the federal poverty guidelines. So if you're 2 people and you're going to sponsor 2 people, you're talking about $26,000 a year. So the minimum, the threshold income you have to show to be a sponsor is very low. USCIS does conduct a background check on both the individual offering a place in the United States and on the Ukrainian who you might be sponsoring. That background check is fairly basic. No one's going to ask you to go give your fingerprints. It's basically just a name and a date of birth check through the FBI database. They don't want individuals with significant criminal records, human trafficking, things like that to sponsor. So when you do the I-134 affidavit of support in the online portal, you're going to need to do one for each family member, even for like a 2-year-old child. So if it's a family of 6, you'll be filling out the same form 6 times. The sponsor is making a commitment to provide for the needs of the Ukrainian. So within this are housing, financial assistance, food, filing for that employment authorization card, filing for a social security card. Basically, you're taking the role of what a refugee caseworker would normally do if an individual is coming to the United States as a refugee. So really, a lot of the work and effort comes after they arrive. The immigration law piece is relatively simple and short. On the US side, you give your financial information. On the Ukrainian side, once you're approved, which can be as quick as a week, or I think someone had been approved in a matter of days. I would say a couple weeks might be a more reasonable expectation. When you're approved on your side, the Ukrainian then gets an email inviting them to open a myuscis.gov account, and then they fill in a bunch of their information. They will be subjected to a similar background check to an individual arriving as a visitor. So once they submit all their information, USCIS makes a determination that they don't have a criminal record, that they don't have a history of immigration fraud, they're not terrorists, certain things that would disqualify them from the program. They get their everything, because it's all done online and through these USCIS online accounts, they get their travel permission by virtue of an email. They will have a 90-day period of time to travel once they are approved, and we recommend that they travel with at least a week of time before their 90 days end, because if they do not travel before the 90 days, they may have to start all over again in the process instead of getting an extension. Some things about denial or approval. So when you're doing this process, there's no filing fee, unlike just about everything else you do with the government. You don't have to pay anything to participate. You can apply if for some reason they don't like a document that you submit, or you get a denial. They say there's not enough income for you to support that family of 12. You can file again and give them additional information. There's no penalty if there's a denial. There's no filing fee. You just file again. If approved, like I said, the beneficiary sets up that account, completes their side, and eventually, hopefully gets an approval and is able to travel. I think we're on to the next one. Unaccompanied minors. Unfortunately, the program does not let you sponsor a teenager. You cannot sponsor someone, I'm traveling and I'm bringing my nephew. Well, in order for that individual to also bring their nephew, they would need a formal guardianship paperwork from the country that they're currently residing in. If they have a lawful guardianship, they could potentially bring the child, but the child cannot travel alone. Is that it? So one other thing about humanitarian parole that some people sometimes ask, what about people who might already be here? Can they participate in this program? Unfortunately, parole in the law, it's like you're standing at that port of entry waiting to get a formal admission into a better status. So if an individual is already inside the United States, they came on a visitor visa, they're here in some other status, they won't qualify for the Uniting for Ukraine program or the assistance that JFS can provide. So Molly, can you tell me about the more complicated process after they get here?
Yeah. Is this okay? All right, so we just talked about the immigration process. If you're going to file a sponsorship, what it looks like for the legal part of it, and that actually is the easiest part of the sponsorship process. The real work, we like to say, happens after somebody arrives in the United States and you're responsible for them. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So upon arrival, generally we expect people to greet the arriving Ukrainians at the airport. You know, it's nice to have a warm, formal welcome to the United States with a sponsor. There are a couple of things that need to happen right away as soon as somebody arrives. The first thing we suggest happening is that you file for work authorization. It's called an Employment Authorization Document, or EAD. It's an immigration form that's filed online, and that document will allow people to become work authorized so they can get a job here in the United States. Right now, processing time can be up to 6 months. We are hearing that if people process the applications online, it could be faster, 3 to 4 months. So we do encourage people to file these online. There's a filing fee of $460. There is a waiver that can be filed because there's a financial challenge of $460 for somebody who doesn't work. That's a lot of money. And it's also, the sponsors, you're already taking on a lot of responsibility, so you may want to choose to file that waiver, or you may choose not to. The work authorization, again, will take potentially 3 to 6 months to be processed. You do not need to file these for children. You only need to file these for people in the family who will physically work. The next thing that you'll need to do, and you need to do this within 10 days with your Ukrainian that you've sponsored, is file a Form AR-11. This is another immigration form that is also done online. The AR-11 is essentially a change of address form that informs immigration of the address of the humanitarian parolee of where they're living. This form needs to be updated whenever somebody moves, so it's very important to keep this in mind that this form has to be filed within 10 days. The next thing we suggest you do is connect with a refugee resettlement agency. I mentioned earlier, Jewish Family Services is a resettlement agency. We provide services to refugees through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. We are kind of bypassed in this process because this is a private citizen sponsorship model. However, Ukrainian refugees are eligible for services from our agencies after they arrive in the U.S. There are 4 refugee resettlement agencies in Western New York. There's Journey's End Refugee Services, International Institute, Catholic Charities, and Jewish Family Services. I obviously think Jewish Family Services is the best because I'm the CEO there, but any of us can provide some level of assistance to support Ukrainians after they arrive in the US. We also can support individuals who may have come through a border crossing and came without a sponsor. So if you do connect to somebody in the community who's here without a sponsor and they need assistance, you can connect them to any of the 4 agencies. After you're connected with an agency, you're going to want to apply for public benefits and Social Security. Social Security cards, you can file a Social Security card online when you do the work authorization. However, we do not recommend that. We recommend that you do an in-person application with the local Social Security office. So if you're here in Niagara County, you're going to go to the one that's on Niagara Falls Boulevard by the 190 exit in Niagara Falls, or you can go to the one in downtown Buffalo. But we suggest you do it in person, one, because you're going to want that application filing receipt for when you do your public benefits, and 2, you want to make sure that everything is accurate and correct and you're actually engaging with somebody. So Social Security is really important. You need that because when you go to apply for public benefits, they are going to ask you for a copy of your filing receipt. Public benefits are available, and we will talk about what benefits the Ukrainians under this program are eligible for, so you're aware. You're also going to want to enroll children in school. Unlike some of the other processes, enrolling children in school should be fairly easy. It's going to be the same depending on the school district as it is for any child in any immigration status or U.S. citizen children applying to a new school. Children are usually placed in age-appropriate grades. So if you have a child who is a 4th grader, they're going to be in 4th grade. That doesn't apply to high school. High school, generally children start at freshman year unless they have transcripts to prove that they have the appropriate credits. But all children are eligible and can easily be connected into school services. So you are making a huge commitment when you sponsor somebody. You're saying you're going to take care of their initial housing and needs, but there is eligibility for certain federally funded benefits that will help individuals be able to sustain themselves a little bit sooner than when they start working. So we do ask that you consider applying for public benefits with the applicant, or come to us so that we can provide assistance. Under the federal, in the federal budget, there is funding to allow us to provide case management supportive services as needed. There's also money for us to provide, there's also services for us to provide career services, employment. So if somebody gets their work authorization, they can come to us and we can help connect them into employment. We work with a lot of employers throughout Western New York. We try to find employment that reflects people's skill set, but sometimes it's the first job available. Everybody who comes in through the Unite for Ukraine program needs to have an initial medical exam. We work with partners in New York State to have those exams done. Those exams are needed for immigration purposes as well as school enrollment. They do TB testing, they make sure all vaccinations are up to date. The partners we work with are Jericho Road in Buffalo and the Community Health Center of Buffalo and Niagara. I always confuse the name on that one. But they are paid by New York State to do those first health assessments. The public assistance that people are eligible for includes Medicaid, which is really important because that's healthcare insurance. And Medicaid is backdated to the date of arrival. So if somebody comes here and they have a medical emergency, as long as you do get that application in, they will be covered back to the date of arrival, so there won't be a concern about utilizing health care. They will also be eligible for cash assistance, and cash assistance is determined by the county that you're in, the size of your family, and a couple other factors. But that cash assistance is going to be essential for people to start becoming self-sufficient and taking care of themselves outside of the support of the sponsor. And then they are also eligible for food stamps and WIC if they're women with children under the age of 5 or pregnant. So they are able to sustain themselves through the supplemental nutritional programs. Finally, anybody who comes through the Unite for Ukraine program is eligible for ESL classes. Those ESL classes are generally provided by local agencies through federal funding, and there's availability in North Tonawanda, Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and a couple of the suburbs. So ESL classes are provided. Our partners, NIPRO and the Ukrainian American Civic Center, are also working together to provide English language classes for Ukrainians at their different locations, and we can hear more about that later. All right, so I talked about kind of like the federal programs that are available and what every resettlement agency can do. I also want to talk a little bit about what JFS does specifically. We have some additional funding that other agencies don't have right now. JFS, in addition to being a resettlement agency, is a behavioral health provider, and we have staff who are specialized, who have specialized skills to work with refugees and immigrants who are impacted by trauma. So we have a dedicated counselor to work with Ukrainians. We also will provide cultural orientation training to all new Ukrainians as they arrive. And this is an opportunity for them to learn about what their rights are, their responsibilities are, a little bit about the integration process. And it's also a way to make sure that individuals are not isolated. They can connect into what's available resource-wise. We are also providing technical support to anybody who is filing a petition for sponsorship. This, for example, is provided through that special funding we have. And we are working with all of our volunteers to build up what we're calling circles of care, or sponsorship circles. Circles of care are teams of 5 to 10 people who come together to provide kind of a supportive network of assistance to sponsors, because it is a very heavy lift when people first arrive. There's a lot to be done. So if you're interested in joining a circle or having a circle connected to you for services, Dasha from our office is here tonight and she can talk with you, or you can reach out to her. We have a lot of people who want to volunteer to help arriving Ukrainians, so you don't have to do this alone. All right, so we have a series of frequently asked questions, and we're going to go through them, and then when we're done with that, we'll be able to take any additional questions from you guys. So, Anne, how much money does a sponsor need to make?
So you need to make 100% of the federal poverty guidelines. Those are, if you Google federal poverty guidelines, you'll come up with a list, but there's also in the package that we handed out today, I think a list of the federal poverty guidelines for up to family sizes of 6 or 8. Molly, how much money does sponsorship cost?
Yeah, so that's a really important question because you're making a commitment to support individuals, particularly when they first arrive. The sponsorship cost really will depend on a couple factors. One is, are you going to be able to house them in your home, or are you looking for a separate place for them to live? Obviously, if they're living somewhere separate, that's going to be an additional cost. The size of the family will determine how much, like if you have a family of 12, you're going to be feeding a lot more mouths, so it's going to cost more money. So when you're thinking about sponsoring and who you might sponsor, you're going to want to keep those things into consideration. The other thing you might want to think about is if you will provide assistance with airfare. Like we mentioned earlier, airfare is not covered by anybody. It has to be a burden of the Ukrainian who's coming here or the sponsor. There are some organizations that provide support with airfare. Miles for Migrants is one of them. And some individuals, as they come here, do have the resources to pay for their airfare. So it really depends on the circumstances that will determine how much the sponsorship will cost. And who can be a sponsor?
So pretty much anybody who's authorized to work in the United States can be a sponsor. If you're a U.S. citizen, you can sponsor. If you are here and you have TPS, Temporary Protected Status is what TPS stands for. It's a program that the U.S. government has that we extend to countries when they're in a state of conflict or a natural disaster. Ukraine was designated for temporary protected status in April, so that helped Ukrainians who are already inside the United States be able to remain here due to the situation in their country. Pretty much if you have work authorization and you have enough income, you can be a sponsor under the Uniting for Ukraine program, even if someone came earlier in the Uniting for Ukraine program and 9 months later they had the income and they could show it, they potentially could sponsor somebody else. Molly, can organizations sponsor?
Why, yes, they can, Anne. So even though the petition has to be filed by a particular individual, somebody has to make that commitment, it can be backed by an organization. So, for example, Jewish Family Services is officially going to file to sponsor 3 cases. I will be filing the petition, but I will be putting the information of the agency on the petition as the backing support. So if you have a church group or a formal organization that is interested in supporting a sponsorship, they can be part of the petition. And it makes the petition financially a little more stable, puts a little less stress on the individual sponsor who's filing. We've seen a lot of church groups who have come together to create a circle of care with a team and filed for a person to come and be connected with them. Again, Jewish Family Services, we're going to be filing for 3 families to come, and we have circles of care that will be wrapping around to provide support to those families. And does the Ukrainian beneficiary need a passport?
All Ukrainians will need passports to get on airplanes, just like anyone engaging in any kind of international travel. They are able to get a passport if they're in Ukraine or if they're outside Ukraine at a Ukrainian consulate or embassy. Ukrainian passports are about $20 to $40 US, so relatively small in terms of the financial expense. Children are included in their parents' passports often for Ukrainians, so they don't necessarily need a separate passport. Molly? How long does a sponsorship application take to get approved?
We've been doing this a while, can you tell? We have so we have seen applications get filed by US sponsors and get approved within a week. So if you are thinking about filing a sponsorship, the turning around time is very quick. You might get notified within a week that you're approved, and then they will start the process of communicating with the recipient overseas, get their information. So it could be less than 90 days from start to finish. So when you're ready to do the sponsorship, take the time, make sure you have everything prepared in advance, because you won't have a lot of time once you file the petition to prepare. And what happens when the parole period expires?
So right now, we don't know exactly what will happen when the parole period expires. Because it's an executive action, will need some either further executive action or congressional action in order for an individual to have some status after that 2-year period of time, or potentially while they're here in the parole status, if the individual has family who can file on their behalf, if they file an application for asylum, if they find employment and they can qualify under an employment-based immigrant visa category, they may be able to change their status. If they remain in a humanitarian parole category, it's possible that it will be extended, or that temporary protected status will be something called redesignated, so that individuals after April of 2020, who arrive after April of 2022, can qualify for temporary protected status. It's also possible we could have something wonderful, like a Ukrainian Adjustment Act, which would function similar to the Lautenberg Amendment parole, where you enter on parole, and after a period of time, usually a year or 2 years, you're eligible to apply for lawful permanent resident status. That doesn't currently exist. It's something that we in the refugee and immigration community would love to see happen, but it's not currently a possibility. Can I file for someone who's already here on a visa? Unfortunately, like I talked about earlier, in order to qualify for parole, you have to be outside the United States. If they've already been admitted to the United States, they don't fit under that part of the US immigration law, so they would not be able to qualify for this program. JFS might still be able to provide certain services, so don't feel like that the person who might be here can't get any help. It's worth reaching out to JFS because they have some ability to help those individuals as well. How can I be connected with a Ukrainian sponsor overseas? Or Ukrainian overseas as a sponsor, sorry.
Right. So a lot of people are filing sponsorship petitions because they have relatives or friends in Ukraine. But if you're interested in sponsoring and you don't know someone, there are a number of mechanisms to connect you with people who are waiting to come to the US under this program. One of those that we recommend is Welcome Connect. It's welcome.us. It's an organization that is filtering in applicants from the US to connect with Ukrainians. It's a great site. They do a little bit of training with you. They kind of go over everything we did, but in a little more depth. And then they will connect you with somebody. They allow you to do some specifications. For example, if you're a single woman and you want to sponsor another single woman, you can indicate that. You also have the opportunity to meet the person in advance. If you have a circle of care or a group that you're going to work with, you want to be connected as part of a Jewish family service system, we can connect you through HIAS, which is Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, with an individual or family to be sponsored as well. So there's a couple routes. I would suggest if you're at that point where you're ready to go, reach out to Dasha. And Dasha is here today, so you'll be able to see her afterwards. And we can either connect you as a group with HIAS or direct you to Welcome US as an individual. So there are opportunities to meet people and to help sponsor them to come to the US. All right, so that is the end of our formal presentation. Our contact information is here. If you would like assistance, please reach out. Right now we will take questions and answers. I don't know how much of that will be recorded, but we'll take your questions at this time. And you want me to repeat the questions? Okay, I'll do that. What are our questions?
Anyone have any questions that we haven't answered?
It's a lot. Go ahead.
Are they not able to work for 4 to 6 months?
So technically, they're not work authorized until they get their employment authorization document. However, the burden is on the employer, so an individual can do things to earn money, like mow a lawn or stuff up to a certain amount of money, but they would have to file that on their taxes when they file their taxes.
It's an unfortunate limitation in the U.S. immigration law. Some types of legal status in the United States, you're authorized to work incident to your status. You don't need to apply separately to get work permission. But humanitarian parole is one of those categories where the law says there's a discretionary ability to apply for work authorization, and you can't apply until you've been granted parole. So you can't apply until the Ukrainian can't apply until they're physically here. And unfortunately, between COVID and general backlogs with U.S. immigration, that lengthy period of time is something that we're currently stuck with.
And while somebody may not be able to work right away, they are eligible right away for public benefits, so they can get cash assistance and food support fairly quickly. It usually, in Erie County, is less than a month. I'm not sure about the timing in Niagara County right now, but it is a very quick process. So there will be some support that becomes available even if the individual is not eligible to work yet.
And for health insurance purposes, that is backdated until their date of arrival, so even if they don't get it right away, if they have an immediate health need, it can still get covered.
Yeah, and our partners from the Ukrainian American Civic Center and UKK and NIPRO have done a lot of fundraising to be able to support individuals as they arrive, and they do have some assistance available. And Mark will talk about it.
No, I'm going to defer to Yuri Gutseshin, who's the president of UKK. If you'd like to explain what's going on, I don't need to be on camera with this protection program, Molly.
Yuri, do we have permission to record you?
Sure. So, just briefly, the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America Buffalo chapter embarked on a fundraising campaign earlier in the year, knowing that we would have this issue. So the community has raised some funds, and we are in a position to provide emergency cash assistance up to $250 for an individual, or capping at $500 for a family. And we've opened an office immediately adjacent to the Ukrainian American Civic Center at 205 Military Road. We're still looking for permanent staffing, currently manned only by volunteers. We'll also refer you, if you desire, to additional Ukrainian American organizations on the cultural, religious, or educational ends. I have a question for Molly and Ann, or perhaps Dasha, and feel free to bounce it back to me. Are U4U humanitarian parolees eligible immediately for public assistance, and what information do they need to provide?
That's a trick question because he works for public assistance.
All right, just because that's my day job. Typically, unless the humanitarian parolee is sponsored by immediate family, if you're a sponsor, you are not part of the household. You are typically the landlord. So you're providing a housing either as room in the private residence, or if you have an in-law apartment, or you have a second unit with it's upper, lower, side by side, or whatever, or a second apartment that you have available, you're providing that residence at zero rent. So those are the items that need to be included in the application by the humanitarian parolee seeking public assistance. If indeed you are an immediate family member, then the household composition will be including you as well, and they'll work out the budget based on need with all available income. Anything else I can add?
So So I would suggest, like, this is very complicated, the public benefit system, what you're eligible for. So I would suggest if you are considering sponsoring somebody, that you reach out to us, let us help you build a team to provide support. And then our case management support can also provide assistance with all of these pieces, so you don't have to do it alone. It's a big, big task, so you don't have to do it alone.
One more thing before so I can sit down. If you need immediate assistance, see me after the presentation.
Mark?
I suggest everybody looks at the
So you need to earn that much money. You don't have, like, so when we talk about sponsoring, you're talking about, you have to show that you have the financial means to take care of somebody. Doesn't mean you have to have the money in the bank, but if you do, that's great. It just means to show you have to have a minimum income, and that minimum income has to be at 100% of the poverty guidelines. So, and the calculation is done like this. If you're a family of one and you want to sponsor 3 people, you're now a family of 4, and you have to make 100% of the poverty guideline for a family of 4, which is about 25,000, I think. It's in the forms. So that's how you determine it. So you don't have to have that money, you just have to show that you have the
USCIS
income.
looks at your adjusted gross income line of your tax return, or if you're a retiree and you get Social Security or other retirement benefits, they add those numbers together, and if your yearly income is at least that amount, you would qualify.
Okay, we're here representing a committee.
So you'd want to talk to the committee about, is it from a church, may I ask? Or,
No, it's a political
okay.
committee.
So the committee itself, if it has any like registered status, like 501c3 or 503b, they can be on the petition, and their financial resources could be considered instead of your individual resources.
It would fall into the organization kind of category. You're still going to have one primary individual who's acting as the sponsor.
And if you already have a committee, then we can connect up and we can do more training about post-arrival and give you a lot of support there as well. Like we said, you don't have to do this alone. Yes?
What's the experience been in finding apartments or housing for people, you know, if you don't have something in your own?
That's $1 million question, right?
Depends a little on where you're looking.
Yeah. So housing is a challenge in general when you're thinking about low-income housing. There's just not enough low-income housing in Western New York at this time of quality standard. And it's a community-wide issue. That said, we tend to find housing in the city of Buffalo for people that is relatively affordable. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. You may live, say, in Williamsville and want to have your family live by you that you sponsor, but housing costs are more expensive, and Williamsville schools don't necessarily have the same skill set as Buffalo schools, who have worked with a large number of traumatized immigrant children and refugee children. So it depends on where you're looking. There is housing available. We are working with partners to look at alternative means for temporary housing. We have a couple opportunities coming available potentially where we can house people for a month while we're looking for more permanent housing. You know, to be honest, as refugees arrive, sometimes we put them in hotels until we find their permanent housing. It is becoming more and more of a challenge in Western New York. Other questions?
How do the children go to school not speaking English?
It's a good question. How do children go to school if they don't speak English? So every child is allowed to have, and the schools are required to provide English language services for non-English speaking children. However, certain school districts have more experience with this, so it really depends on where they end up going. Like if you have a child who goes to the Fredonia School District, they don't have a lot of refugees and immigrants, so they probably don't have a lot of supportive services immediately available, and they might have to outsource that. But every child has the right to English language classes and English language services to learn English and to be able to have their language accommodated in the classroom.
And you would be surprised at how quickly the kids pick up language. It's really amazing.
Sponge.
Like with sometimes within like a month of being here.
Yeah.
They're on like full conversations. It's pretty amazing. For high school kids, for kids who are farther in school, for example, maybe they took, you know, they're like a 10th or 11th grader. They've already taken chemistry or biology or a math class. They can potentially take the New York State Regents exam in their own language. New York State accommodates that on a statewide basis. So you could take your Regents exam in Ukrainian. It's a unique program, but it's a supportive program. The city of Buffalo might have a little bit more experience with that, but every school district in New York State offers that.
Yuri?
Let me just add, and you'll be surprised, typically school-age children coming from Ukraine already know quite a bit of English. It is offered as a second language in Ukraine. The schools are well developed, and they'll come in with a fairly high level skill set. Parents, not so much.
Yeah, so there's another question we also get is how do I communicate with the person I'm sponsoring, right? We find that a lot of Ukrainians that are coming in through this program have a little bit more English, so there's some basic capacity to communicate. People do start ESL classes and they start learning. You know, if it's an emergency, there are interpretation services available, but people learn to communicate pretty effectively even if they don't speak the same language. And oftentimes children do speak more English, so if you're sponsoring somebody with children, the children might be able to communicate more effectively with you than their parents do. We don't encourage using children as interpreters, though.